Alrighty. Oh, nice. Warren Steele's here already. Thank you, Warren Steele, for showing up. Glad your meeting let out early. Hopefully you didn't have to pull too many nose hairs to stay awake. I remember those days. Now I just fall asleep. It's a lot less work. All right. So welcome back to anyone who hasn't, and to another Free Read Fridays. And today we're doing some more Starfish by Peter Watts. This is, I kid you not, an actual cover for Starfish. I don't know what's going on here. And to quote Peter Watts himself from his gallery page, where he has these posted, he says, quote, "From Arabesque's Russian translation of Starfish. I really don't know what to say." Neither do I. I have no idea what this cover is supposed to mean. No clue. Um, It looks really cool though. Like it looks neat. It just I'm not entirely sure what it has to do with the book at all. But that's okay. So that brings us to the end of official covers, actually. So with subsequent streams, I'm going to be doing fan art, and there's a fair amount of it. There's a fair amount of fan art. I'm rather a bunch of them are quite good. I mean, Peter Watts gushes about them. There's even some fake book covers, which is what I guess we'll be doing next week. Is a couple of those. Um, how that works, you'll see. You'll see. They're actually some of them are ingenious. Some of them are very, very good. So yeah. Um, So I checked Peter Watts's blog, and there's a recent blog post that's highly relevant to certain aspects of this book and technically the second book as well. Actually, the entire series, but it's kind of important. So I'm like, oh great, one more thing I'm going to be adding on to my coda uh, epilogue afterword stream. Um, I've already got a short story. I've already got that ties in. I've already got the afterword, and now I have this blog post, which is fairly meaty and kind of heady. Um, Also gets you another in on how Peter Watts thinks. As before, I've got a link to the text of the novel in the stream description. At least on YouTube. I don't know if Twitch adopts those. I should probably check. I'm too lazy. Who tunes in through Twitch? Um, Twitch doesn't. I don't get the viewership throughput in order to actually have videos up on Twitch saved anyway, so it doesn't really matter. It's kind of inconsequential. I do it because sometimes I get random traffic, and I know I've gotten some people over from Twitch who are looking at that and we're like, oh, that's fairly interesting. So previously on, what was previously on? What was previously on? I actually don't remember. It's been a whole week. Oh, right. The abduction of Judy Karako. She's been abductorated, and they're treating her like she's dangerous. And she's a rifter, so yeah, she is. So there's still some weird doings going on over the Juan de Fuca Rift and in that general region of the Pacific. It's a little strange. Um, oh yeah, heady blog post, and it'll. You see, this is a how you say a pun or play on words is a bit of pun story, a word play. You'll see, it's multi-entendre. I'm being too clever by half, and I'll have forgotten the joke already by then, but it's fine. It sounded cool now. So this will be a fairly short segment. I mean, if it's even an hour, I'll be kind of impressed because it's like no pages. It's very short. Because I got things going on, and next week's going to be short too. But don't worry. The week after that is going to be beefy. Like that's going to be a pretty sizable read. I think I'll include the actual epilogue. I think the epilogue's in here, right? No? No, it's just listed as chapter, whatever. Okay. Anyway, that one will be good. But the next two readings are going to be fairly short. Next week's will be a little longer than this week's. This week's is going to be over and done with. If people prefer longer form or shorter form, tell me. I can accommodate. If people would rather have I know listening to it live has, it's there's perks either way. Yeah, because this part is only like 10 pages long, maybe 20. It's not even 20. It's short. Um, so it's if people prefer I do shorter segments anyway, I can in most cases find a way to make that happen. I just have to take the time ahead of time to measure it out. So this time, though, we do get to see the return of everybody's favorite Eve Scanlon. He's back! And at this point, things are going to start really, really clicking into place. Like, this is the part in the book where the aha moments are going to start kicking in hot, heavy, and hard, and with a vengeance. I think people are probably starting to piece together some of what might be going on. But this is where everything starts coming due, basically. And like things that didn't make sense are going to start making sense, and things that you thought made sense are going to be revealed in new lights. This segment itself may not, but it is the start. This is the beginning of the end of the twilight of well, it is the beginning of a sequence of events that will take 3 books to resolve. And not really even resolve at the end. It's the ending to the final novel is I like it. I can see why some people might be dissatisfied, but it's a tad open. But it isn't. It is definitely not really a cliffhanger, kind of. Uh, this novel is a cliffhanger, and the next. But it's still like has a clear end. All right, give me one sec here, and we'll get cracking on part 6 of Starfish by Peter Watts. Part 6, Quarantine. Chapter 1, Bubble. For a week now, Eve Scanlon's world had measured 5 meters by 8. In all that time, he had not seen another living soul. There were plenty of ghosts, though. Faces passed across his workstation, full of cheerful concern about his comfort, his diet, whether the latest gastrointestinal tap had made him uncomfortable. There were poltergeists, too. Sometimes they possessed the medical teleoperator that hung from the ceiling, made it dance and stab and steal slivers of flesh from Scanlon's body. They spoke with many voices, but rarely said anything of substance. "It's probably nothing, Dr. Scanlon," the teleop said once, a talking exoskeleton. "Just a preliminary report from Rand, Washington. Some new pathogen on the rift. Probably benign." Or, in a pleasant female voice, "You're obviously in good health. I'm sure there's nothing to worry about. Still, you know how careful we have to be these days. Even acne would mutate into a plague if we let it. Now we just another 2 cc's." Well, that came across as incoherent, but it looks incoherent. After a few days, Scanlon had stopped asking. Whatever it was, he knew it had to be serious. The world was full of nasty microbes, new ones spawned by accident, old ones set free from dark corners of the world, common ones mutated into novel shapes. Scanlon had been quarantined before a couple of times. Most people had. It usually involved technicians in body condoms, nurses trained to maintain spirits with a well-timed joke. He'd never heard of everything being done by remote control before. Maybe it was a security issue. Maybe the GA didn't want the news leaking out, so they'd minimized the personnel involved. Or maybe the potential danger was so great that they didn't want to risk live techs. Every day, Scanlon discovered some new symptom: shortness of breath, headaches, nausea. He was astute enough to wonder if any of them were real. It occurred to him, with increasing frequency, that he might not get out of there alive. Something resembling Patricia Rowan haunted his screen every now and then, asking questions about vampires. Not even a ghost, really. A simulation, masquerading as flesh and blood. Its machinery showed through in subtle repetitions, derivative conversational loops, a fixation on keyword over concept. Who was in charge down there, it wanted to know. Did Clark carry more weight than Lubin? Did Brander carry more weight than Clark? As if anyone could glean the essence of those twisted, fantastic creatures with a few inept questions. How many years had it taken Scanlon to achieve his level of expertise? It was rumored that Rowan didn't like real-time phone conversations. Corpses were always paranoid about security or some such thing. Still, it made Scanlon angry. It was her fault that he was here now, after all. Whatever he'd caught on the rift, he'd caught because she'd ordered him down there, and now all she sent to him were puppets? Did she really consider him that inconsequential? He never complained, of course. His aggression was too passionately passive. Instead, he toyed with the model she sent. It was easy to fool, programmed to look for certain words and phrases in answers to any given question. Just a trained dog, really, grabbing and fetching at the right set of commands. It was only when it ran back home, eager jaws clamped around some utterly useless bit of trivia, that its master would realize how truly ambiguous certain key phrases could be. He lost count of the times he sent it back, sated on junk food. It kept returning, but it never learned. He patted the teleop. "You're probably smarter than that doppelganger of hers, you know. Not that that's saying much, but at least you get your pound of flesh on the first try." Surely by now Rowan knew what he was doing. Maybe this was some sort of game. Maybe, eventually, she'd admit defeat, come seek an audience in person. That hope kept him playing. Without it, he would have given up and cooperated out of sheer boredom. On the first day of his quarantine, he'd asked one of the ghosts for a dreamer, and been refused. Normal circadian metabolism was a prerequisite for one of the tests, it said. They didn't want his tissues cheating. For several days after that, Scanlon hadn't been able to sleep at all. Then he'd fallen into a dreamless abyss for 28 hours. When he'd finally awakened, his body had ached from an unremembered wave of microsurgical strikes. "Impatient little bastard, aren't you?" he'd murmured to the teleop. "Can't even wait until I'm awake? I hope it was good for you." He'd kept his voice low, in case there were any active pickups in the room. None of the workstation ghosts seemed to know anything about psychology. They were all physiologists and tinker toy jocks. If they'd caught him talking to a machine, they might think he was going crazy. Now he was sleeping a full 9 hours daily. Unpredictable attacks by the poltergeists cost him maybe an hour on top of that. Crew reports and IPD profiles, none of which ever seemed to come from BB Station, appeared regularly in his terminal, another 4 or 5 hours a day. The rest of the time, he watched television. Strange things happening out there. A mysterious underwater explosion on the mid-Atlantic ridge, big enough for a nuke, but no confirmation one way or the other. Israel and Tanaka Kruger had both recently reactivated their nuclear testing programs, but neither admitted to any knowledge of this particular blast. The usual protests from corps and countries alike. Things were getting even testier than usual. Just the other day, it came out that Nampak, several weeks earlier, or is it Enumpak? I can't remember how I was pronouncing it originally. I think I was pronouncing it Enumpak for North American Pacific. Several weeks earlier, had responded to a relatively harmless bit of piracy on the part of a Korean muckraker by blowing it out of the water. Let's read that sentence again, because I realize I know what that means, but it's not clear if I say it in a laissez-faire fashion. Just the other day, it came out that Nampak, several weeks earlier, had responded to a relatively harmless bit of piracy on the part of a Korean muckraker by blowing it out of the water. Regional news was just as troubling. An estimated 300 dead after a firebomb took out most of the Urchin shipyards outside Portland. It was a fairly hefty death toll for 2 a.m., but Urchin property abutted the strip and a number of refs had been caught in the firestorm. No known motive. Certain similarities to a much smaller explosion a few weeks earlier, and a few hundred kilometers further north, in the Coquitlam Burb. Coquitlam. Coquitlam? I don't actually know how that's pronounced. Anyway, it's a burb, as in suburb. That one had been attributed to gang warfare. And speaking of the Strip, more unrest among refugees forever hemmed in along the coastline. The usual rationale from the usual municipal entities. Waterfront's the only available real estate these days, and besides, can you imagine what it would cost to install sewer systems for $7 million if we let them come inland? Another quarantine, this time over some nematode recently escaped from the headquarters of the Ivindo. No news of anything from the North Pacific. Nothing from Juan de Fuca. 2 weeks into his sentence, Scanlon realized that the symptoms he'd imagined earlier had all disappeared. In fact, in a strange way, he actually felt better than he had in years. Still, they kept him locked up. There were more tests to be done. Over time, his initial sharp fears subsided into a chronic, dull ache in the stomach, so diffuse he barely felt it anymore. One day he awoke with a sense of almost frantic relief. Had he really ever thought that the GA might wall him away forever? Had he really been so paranoid? They were taking good care of him. Naturally, he was important to them. He'd lost sight of that at first. But the vampires were still problematic, or Rowan wouldn't be trolling her puppet through this workstation. Through his workstation, I apologize. And the GA hadn't chosen Eve Scanlon to study that problem because they knew he was the best man for the job. Oh, wait, I don't know how to read. Don't mind me. Rowan wouldn't be trolling her puppet through his workstation. And the GA had chosen Eve Scanlon to study that problem because they knew he was the best man for the job. Now they were just protecting their investment, making sure he was healthy. He laughed out loud at that earlier panicky self. There was really nothing to worry about. Besides, he kept up with the news. It was safer in here. So a lot just got dropped then. I promise things are going to make a lot more sense in book 2. All this stuff is going to come home. Chapter 2, Enema. He only spoke to it at night, of course. After the day's samples and scans, when it folded when it folded up against the ceiling with its lights doused. He didn't want the ghosts listening in. Not that it embarrassed him to confide in a machine. Scanlon knew far too much about human behavior to worry over such a harmless quirk. Lonely end users were always falling in love with VR simulations. Programmers bonded with their own creations, instilling imaginary life into every utterly predictable response. Hell, people even talked to their pillows if they were really short of alternatives. The brain wasn't fooled, but the heart took comfort in the pretense. It was perfectly natural, especially during periods of prolonged isolation. Nothing to worry about at all. They need me, Scanlon told it now, the ambient lighting damped down until he could barely see. I know vampires. I know them better than anyone. I've lived with them. I've survived them. These drybacks up here only use them. He looked up. The teleop hung above him like a bat in the dim light, and didn't interact, and somehow that was the most comforting thing of all. I think Rowan's giving in. Her puppet said she was going to try and find some time. No answer. Scanlon shook his head at the sleeping machine. I'm lo- I'm losing it, you know. I'm turning into a complete brainstem is what I'm doing. He didn't admit it often these days. Certainly not with the same sense of horror and uncertainty that he'd felt even a week before. But after all he'd been through lately, it was only natural that he'd have some adjustments to make. Here he was, quarantined, possibly infected by some unknown germ. Before that, he'd been through a gauntlet that would have driven most people right over the brink. And before that, yes, he'd been through a lot, but he was a professional. He could still turn around, take a good hard look at himself, more than most people could do. Everyone had doubts and insecurities, after all. The fact that he was strong enough to admit. Oh, it's missing a T. The fact that he was strong enough to admit to this didn't make him a freak. Quite the contrary. Scanlon stared across to the far end of the room. A window of isolation membrane stretched across the upper half of that wall, looked through to a small dark chamber that had been empty since his arrival. Patricia Rowan would be there soon. She would get first-hand benefit of Scanlon's new insights, and if she didn't already know how valuable he was, she'd be convinced after he spoke to her. The long wait for recognition was almost over. Things were about to make a huge change for the better. Eve Scanlon reached up and touched a dormant metal claw. I like you better like this, he remarked. You're less hostile. I wonder who you'll sound like tomorrow. Sound like tomorrow. It sounded like some kid fresh out of grad school. It acted like one, too. It wanted him to drop his pants and bend over. Stuff it, Scanlon said at first, his public persona firmly in place. Exactly my intention, said the machine, wiggling a pencil-shaped probe on the end of one arm. Come on, Dr. Scanlon, you know it's for your own good. In fact, he didn't know any such thing. He'd been wondering lately if the indignities he suffered in here might be due entirely to some repressed asshole's misdirected sadism. Just a few months ago, it would have driven him crazy. But Eve Scanlon was finally starting to see his place in the universe, and was discovering that he could afford to be tolerant. Other people's pettiness didn't bother him nearly as much as it used to. He was above it. He did, however, stop to pull the curtain across the window before undoing his belt. Rowan could show up at any time. Don't move, said the poltergeist. This won't hurt. Some people even enjoy it. Scanlon did not. The realization came as a bit of a relief. I don't see the hurry, he complained. Nothing goes in or out of me without you people turning a valve somewhere to let it past. Why not just take what I send down to the toilet? Well, whoop, there should not be a 2 there. Okay. Why not just take what I send down the toilet? We do that too. the machine said, coring. Since you got here, in fact. But you never know. Some stuff degrades pretty quickly when it leaves a body.
If it degrades that fast, then why am I still in quarantine?
Hey, I didn't say it was harmless. Just said it might have turned into something else. Or maybe it is harmless. Maybe you just pissed off someone upstairs. Scanlon winced.
The people upstairs like me just fine. What are you looking for, anyway?
Pyranosal RNA.
I'm not sure I remember what that is.
No reason you should. It's been out of fashion for 3.5 billion years.
No shit.
Don't you wish? The probe withdrew. It was all the rage in primordial times until. Excuse me, said Patricia Rowan's voice. Scanlon glanced automatically over to the workstation. She wasn't there. The voice was coming from behind the curtain.
Ah, company. I've.
Oh, wait. Ah, company. I've got what I came for, anyway. The arm swung around and neatly inserted the soiled probe into a dumbwaiter. By the time Scanlon had his pants back up, the teleop had folded into neutral. See you tomorrow, said the poltergeist, and fled. The teleop's lights went out. She was here, right in the next room. Vindication was at hand. Scanlon took a breath and pulled back the curtain. Patricia Rowan stood in shadow on the other side. Her eyes glittered with faint mercury, almost vampire eyes, but diluted, translucent, not opaque. Her contacts, of course. Scanlon had tried a similar pair once. They linked into a weak RF signal from your watch, scrolled images across your field of view at a virtual range of 40 centimeters. Patricia Rowan saw Scanlon and smiled. Whatever else she saw through those magical lenses, he could only guess. Dr. Scanlon, she said, it's good to see you again. He smiled back.
I'm glad you came by. We have a lot to talk about.
Rowan nodded and opened her mouth.
And although your doppelgangers are perfectly adequate for normal conversation, they tend to lose a lot of the nuances.
Closed it again.
Especially given the kind of information you seem to be interested in.
Rowan hesitated a moment. Yes, of course. We need your insights, Dr. Scanlon. Yes, good, of course. Your report on Beebe was quite, well, interesting, but things have changed somewhat since you filed it. He nodded thoughtfully.
In what way?
Lubin's gone, for one thing.
Gone?
Disappeared. Dead, perhaps, although apparently there's no signal from his dead man. Or possibly just regressed, like Fisher.
I see. And have you learned whether anyone at the other stations has gone over?
It was one of the predictions he'd made in his report. Her eyes, rippling silver, seemed to stare at a point just beside his left shoulder. We can't really say. Certainly we've had some losses, but rifters tend not to be very forthcoming with details. As we expected, of course.
Yes, of course.
Scanlon tried on a contemplative look.
So Lubin's gone. Not surprising. He was definitely closest to the edge. In fact, if I remember, I predicted...
Probably just as well, Rowan murmured.
Excuse me?
She shook her head, as if clearing it of some distraction. Nothing. Sorry.
Ah.
Scanlon nodded again. No need to harp on Lubin if Rowan didn't want to. He'd made lots of other predictions.
There's also the matter of the Gansfeld effect, I noted. The remaining crew...
Yes, we've spoken with a couple of other experts about that.
And?
They don't think the Rift environment is sufficiently impoverished, is the way they put it. Not sufficiently impoverished to function as a Gansfeld.
I see.
Scanlon felt part of his old self bristling. He smiled, ignoring it.
How do they explain my observations?
Actually, Rowan coughed, they're not completely convinced you
did observe anything significant. Apparently, there was some evidence that your report was dictated under conditions of, well, personal stress. Scanlon carefully froze his smile into place. Well, everyone's entitled to their opinion. Rowan said nothing. Although the fact that the rift is a stressful environment shouldn't come as news to any real expert, Scanlon continued. That was the whole point of the program, after all. Rowan nodded. I don't disbelieve you, Doctor. I'm not really qualified to judge one way or the other. True, he didn't say. And in any event, Rowan added, you were there. They weren't. Scanlon relaxed. Of course, she'd put his opinion ahead of those other experts, whoever they were. He was the one she'd chosen to go down there, after all. It's not really important, she said now, dismissing the subject. Our immediate concern is the quarantine. Mine as well as theirs. But of course he didn't let that on. It wouldn't be professional to seem too concerned about his own welfare right now. Besides, they were treating him fine in here. At least he knew what was going on. Yet, Rowan finished. Scanlon blinked. What? Excuse me? I said, for obvious reasons, we've decided not to recall the crew from BB just yet. I see. Well, you're in luck. They don't want to leave. Rowan stepped closer to the membrane. Her eyes faded in the light. You're sure of this? Yes. The rift is their home, Miss Rowan, in a way a layperson probably couldn't understand. They're more alive down there than they ever were on shore. He shrugged. Besides, even if they wanted to leave, what could they do? They're hardly going to swim all the way back to the mainland. They might, actually. What? It's possible, Rowan admitted. Theoretically. And we caught one of them, leaving. What? Up in the euphotic zone. We had a sub stationed up there just to keep an eye on things. One of the rifters, Cracker or... A glowing thread wiggled across each eye. Caraco, that's it. Judy Caraco. She was heading straight for the surface. They figured she was making a break for it. Scanlon shook his head. Caraco does laps, Miss Rowan. It was in my report. I know. Perhaps your report should have been more widely distributed. Although her laps never took her that close to the surface before. I can see why they... Rowan shook her head. At any rate, they took her. A mistake, perhaps. A faint smile. Those happen sometimes. I see, Scanlon said. So now we're in something of a situation, Rowan went on. Maybe the BB crew thinks that Caraco is just another accidental casualty, or maybe they're getting suspicious. So do we let it lie, hope things blow over? Will they make a break if they think we're covering something up? Will some go and some stay? Are they a group or a collection of individuals? She fell silent. A lot of questions, Scanlon said after a while. Okay, then. Here's just one. Would they obey a direct order to stay on the rift? They might stay on the rift. They might stay on the rift, Scanlon said, but not because you ordered them to. We were thinking maybe Lenny Clark, Rowan said. According to your report, she's more or less the leader. And Lubin was the wild card. Now he's out of the picture. Perhaps Clark could keep the others in line. If we can reach Clark. Scanlon shook his head. Clark's not any sort of leader, not in the conventional sense. She adopts her own behaviors independently, and the others just follow her lead. It's not the usual authority-based system as you'd understand it. But if they follow her lead, as you say... I suppose, Scanlon said slowly, she's the most likely to obey an order to stay on site, no matter how hellish the situation. She's hooked on abusive relationships, after all. He stopped. You could always try telling them the truth, he suggested. She nodded. It's a possibility, certainly. And how do you think they'd react? Scanlon said nothing. Would they trust us? Rowan asked. Scanlon smiled. Do they have any reason to? Perhaps not, Rowan sighed. But no matter what we tell them, the issue's the same. What will they do when they learn they're stuck down there? Probably nothing. That's where they want to be. Rowan glanced at him curiously. I'm surprised you'd say that, Doctor. Why? There's no place I'd rather be than my own apartment. But the moment anyone put me under house arrest, I'd want very much to leave it, and I'm not even slightly dysfunctional. Scanlon let the last part slide. That's a point, he admitted. A very basic one, she said. I'm surprised someone with your background would miss it. I didn't miss it. I just think other factors outweigh it. On the outside, Scanlon smiled. As you say, you're not at all dysfunctional. No, not yet, anyway. Rowan's eyes clouded with a sudden flurry of data. She stared into space for a moment or two, assessing. Excuse me, bit of trouble on another front. She focused again on Scanlon. Do you ever feel guilty, Eve? He laughed, cut himself off. Guilty? Why? About the project, about what we did to them. They're happier down there. Believe me, I know. Do you? Better than anyone, Miss Rowan. You know that. That's why you came to me today. She didn't speak. Besides, Scanlon said, nobody drafted them. It was their own free choice. Yes, Rowan agreed softly. Was. And extended her arm through the window. The isolation membrane coated her hand like liquid glass. It fit the contours of her fingers without a wrinkle, painted palm and wrist and forearm in a transparent sheath, pulled away just short of her elbow and stretched back to the window pane. Thanks for your time, Eve, Rowan said. After a moment, Scanlon shook the proffered hand. It felt like a condom, slightly lubricated. You're welcome, he said. Rowan retracted her arm, turned away. The membrane smoothed behind her like a soap bubble. But, Scanlon said. She turned back. Yes? Was that all you wanted? He said. For now. Miss Rowan, if I may, there's a lot about the people down there you don't know. A lot. I'm the only one who can give it to you. I appreciate that, The whole geothermal program hinges on them. I'm sure you see that. She stepped back towards the membrane. I do, Dr. Scanlon, believe me, but I have a number of priorities right now, and in the meantime, I know where to find you. Once more she turned around. She turned away. Scanlon tried very hard to keep his voice level. Miss Rowan! Something changed in her then, a subtle hardening of posture that would have gone unnoticed by most people. Scanlon saw it as she turned back to face him. A tiny pit opened in his stomach. He tried to think of what to say. Yes, Dr. Scanlon, she said, her voice a bit too level. I know you're busy, Miss Rowan, but how much longer do I have to stay in here? She softened fractionally. Eve, we still don't know. In a way, it's just another quarantine, but it's taking longer to get a handle on this one. It's from the bottom of the ocean, after all. What is it exactly? I'm not a biologist. She glanced at the floor for a moment, then met his eyes again. But I can tell you this much. You don't have to worry about keeling over dead. Even if you have this thing, it doesn't really attack people. Then why? Apparently there are some agricultural concerns. They're more afraid of the effect it might have on certain plants. He considered that. It made him feel a little better. I really have to go now. Rowan seemed to consider something for a moment, then added, and no more doppelgangers, I promise. That was rude of me. Chapter 3 Turncoat She'd told the truth about the doppelgangers. She'd lied about everything else. After 4 days, Scanlon left a message in Rowan's cache. 2 days later, he left another. In the meantime, he waited for the spirit which had thrust its finger up his ass, to come back and tell him more about primordial biochemistry. It never did. By now, even the other ghosts weren't visiting very often, and they barely said a word when they did. Rowan didn't return Scanlan's calls. Patience melted into uncertainty. Uncertainty simmered into conviction. Conviction began to gently boil.
Locked up in here for 3 fucking weeks, and all she gives me is a 10-minute courtesy call. 10 lousy minutes of my experts say you're wrong, and it's such a basic point, I can't believe you missed it. And then she just walks away. She just fucking smiles and walks away. Know what I should have done?
He growled at the teleop. It was the middle of the day, but he didn't care anymore. Nobody was listening. They'd deserted him in here. They'd probably forgotten all about him.
What I should have done is rip a hole in that fucking membrane when she was here. Let a little of whatever's in here out to mix with the air in her lungs. Bet that'd inspire her to look for some answers.
He knew it was a fantasy. The membrane was almost infinitely flexible, and just as tough. Even if he succeeded in cutting it, it would repair itself before any mere gas molecules could jump through. Still, it was satisfying to think about. Not satisfying enough. Scanlan picked up a chair and hurled it at the window. The membrane caught it like a form-fitting glove, enfolded it, let it fall almost to the floor on the other side. Then, slowly, the window tightened down to 2 dimensions. The chair toppled back into Scanlan's cell, completely undamaged.
And to think she'd had the fucking temerity to lecture him with that inane little homily about house arrest. As though she'd caught him in some sort of lie when he'd suggested the vampires might stay put. As though she thought he was covering for them. Sure, he knew more about vampires than anyone. That didn't mean he was one. That didn't mean... "We could have treated you better," Lubin had said, there at the last. We. As though he'd been speaking for all of them. As though, finally, they were accepting him. As though... But vampires were damaged goods, always had been. That was the whole point. How could Eve Scanlan qualify for membership in a club like that? He knew one thing, though. He'd rather be a vampire than one of these assholes up here. That was obvious now. Now that the pretenses were dropping away and they didn't even bother talking to him anymore. They exploited him and then they shunned him. They used him just like they used the vampires. He'd always known that deep down, of course, but he'd tried to deny it, kept it stifled under years of accommodation and good intentions and misguided efforts to fit in. These people were the enemy. They'd always been the enemy. And they had him by the balls. He spun around and slammed his fist into the examination table. It didn't even hurt. He continued until it did. Panting, knuckles raw and stinging, he looked around for something else to smash. The teleop woke up enough to hiss and spark when the chair bounced off its central trunk. One of the arms wiggled spastically for a moment. A faint smell of burnt insulation. Then nothing. Only slightly dented, the teleop slept on above a litter of broken paradigms. Tip for the day, Scanlan snarled at it. Never trust a dryback.
And with that, we're going to call it. Super short, I know. Like, what, that was half an hour, 45 minutes? Yeah, like 40 minutes. Next week will be a bit longer. That'll probably be like, I don't know, maybe an hour and a half tops. Oh, nice one. Well, see you later, Warren. See you next time. I intend to have a great weekend. You won't have much catching up to do. So yeah, things are moving along. Most of the clues you need to start piecing stuff together is basically already there. It's just figuring out why, where, who, when, and how. And most of those answers will be given in this book, and then where do we go from here will be the next, and that is where Maelstrom comes in.
And I have just learned that someone just released an Audible version of Maelstrom. So if you don't want to listen to my rendition of Maelstrom coming up in however many months it'll take me to get to that, go ahead and do that, because they'll certainly do a more professional job. I don't do this for money, they do. So you'd assume they do a professional job, right? I do these live. I do these live. They are unscripted, other than the fact that I'm reading a script in the form of a book, which incidentally you can read along with me because Peter Watts, again, has it up on his website. Thanks to a Creative Commons license, you can read it at any time, at a time of your choosing. You can read it along as I do it. You can see how much I mangle. Honestly, I think the version they have up on the that he has up on the website is better than the one I have. The one I have is like this nth generation ratchet reprint. It's really bad. Never buy something from a group called Feed Books. Feed Books. Never. I will never do it again. Very disappointed. www.feedbooks.com. Food for the mind. See, I approve of that, but like, I doubt Peter Watts got any money for that because this is like ripped from the PDF or the HTML document version of it, and it is poorly formatted in book format. I'll probably look for a copy of the book, a better copy, even though it'll be like a used copy. I don't mind. Unless it's had a reprint? I don't know. Anyway, getting back on track. So yeah, there's an Audible version of Maelstrom, I think, which is the sequel to this that just came out not too long ago, that I heard about. I haven't listened to it, so for all I know, it's terrible. I doubt it, though. I doubt it. So if you don't want to listen to me doing it, it's fine. I will not feel bad about it because, again, I'm doing this for my own self gratification. I guess to hear myself talk, as sad as that sounds. It's more that I just want to spread these books around. People who might not otherwise have encountered these, having an opportunity to encounter them. Um, I do highly, highly, highly recommend getting a copy, or at least reading the copy that's on the website. I should have that linked in the on the YouTube channel anyway, in the stream description. Um, you can read it right there. You could even print it out if you wanted, if you had the printer paper. Duplex that. Definitely make sure it's printing on both sides, because otherwise it's a long book. It's not a tiny book. It's like 300 something pages, 334, 335, around that. Um, so yeah, with that I gotta go. Hi, AE Optical Antenna. Thank you for showing up. I'm just wrapping up because it's a super short one today. I'm sorry. This week. Next week will also be pretty short, but slightly longer than this week. But yeah, again, I do this live starting at noon-ish Eastern Standard Time, so find whatever time zone converter you need to do to get that sorted. Is usually around when I start. I've been like 10 minutes late the last couple days, I doubt, or last couple weeks, several weeks, months, whatever. Anyway, where was I going with that? Yeah, it's all archived on the YouTube channel. I usually get everything into its respective playlists roughly at the end of every month. Let me look ahead at my schedule here. Okay, so I have a minimum of three more streams. I think that's all I'll have to do is three more. Yeah. So the last one should. No, no. Yes, should be on. Uh, I am losing my mind. I'm looking at this calendar and it just stopped making sense. I feel like I have agnosia or something, or aphasia. Oh my goodness. Should be on December 9th. Should be the last installment of this, and I'll get them all put into their respective playlists accordingly, so it'll be more organized again. Yeah. So my blathering time is over. Um, Hope you enjoyed. And yeah, whether you're watching this after the fact or not, do tell me. I I don't respond to most of the comments. I'm sorry. That's because I don't actually look all that often. Feel free to tell me if you'd rather have long form or short form. Like if these shorter one-ish hour segmented ones work better for people or longer ones, I can accommodate. My schedule for the last couple weeks, well, last week, this week, and next week are, well, actually, really to the end of them. Yeah, basically that, are kind of wild. So I've had to do shorter ones. But if people prefer it shorter, I can make streams shorter going forward. Um, if that is more digestible. I assume with the video, the YouTube video format, it's not an issue. But like if it's live streamed, if people are preferring that, so whatever. Feel free to tell me one way or another. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. Thanks. I guess I have new people who check the stream out occasionally, who've left a couple comments asking for book recommendations and stuff. I'm happy to give those through my. Um, I have a library, and although it's not perfect, people asking for suggestions, I'm more than happy to give them. Feel free, other people, to give recommendations. Like I'm always open to recommendations. I'll try anything. If I don't like it, I don't like it, but I'll still check it out. The number of books I haven't been able to finish ever, despite my best efforts to try, have been few and far between. I usually find a way. I'm looking at you, Foucault's pendulum. Umberto Eco. I did actually get through that eventually. It took me far longer to do that than I wanted it to, but do I? Saturday would be great. Ugh. So my problem is my weekends are busy. My weekends are like where all my work gets done. So like there was a long time where I was doing story time Saturdays, and I was doing them on Saturdays because that's when my schedule worked, and then that stopped being true. So Saturday is tough. I can see going forward if I can get that changed though. I'll work on that. I will keep that in mind. And I know that noon Eastern Standard Time on a Friday is like deeply suboptimal for people trying to tune in. That's like the weirdest time, but it's the way my schedule has bracketed itself beautifully so that I can actually manage that. I usually have like 2-ish to 3 hours of wiggle room before I have to go and do things. Or I can get things done ahead of time, that sort of thing. I will try. I will keep that in mind. Um, if you're watching the like, I love when people are able to tune in, but so long as you're enjoying them even after the fact, it's good too. I will try to start doing Saturdays. Maybe I'll start doing that after I get through. Yeah, that might be a logical point to do it. Is after I get through. Oh yeah, yeah. If you're in San Jose, it's God. That's what, like a 3-hour difference. Yeah, so it's like 10 o'clock for you, I guess, right? If that's a Pacific Mountain or Pacific time. Oh, geez, yeah. Or 4 hours different. Ugh. So yeah, no, it's not ideal. I know that. Um, but if I can work it, I'll work it. Um, it works fine for me, but I realize it's not ideal for people trying to tune in live. Anyway, that's my rambling over. The usual spiel. Um, I've already given. So stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other. Yeah, it's kind of like a signing off thing. Isn't that cool? I do that every time. The fact that I can rattle that off by rote as well as the times and whatnot is sort of distressing because I did this as like an initial hobby thing. It was never intended to be serious, but yeah, it became a staple, something to keep me sane in these trying times. God knows. Goodness knows they are trying. Oh boy. But yeah. So yeah. Stay safe. Stay. Bleh. I can't talk. Oh man. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. If you can. Some people got crucified for that. Anyway, heck, people got crucified for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, so you didn't even have to have a message. Good times. In fact, you could say some do. And hey, if you are an avid Twitter user, I don't, so I have no idea. I have no idea. I'm just watching that particular fire burn, and I'm like, I hope nobody's losing their livelihood. Okay, that's not true. There are some people whose livelihoods I hope are deeply affected by that, but the people who used to work at Twitter, I feel for a lot because just getting screwed the way they have been, is just not okay. And y'all just keep trying, just keep trying, man. Like, just don't let it get you down, I guess. Cause man, that's rough. But hey, yeah, I know. What a waste of money. Nobody is benefiting from that whole situation. Like that little evil gremlin part of me that like delights in Schadenfreude is just like hopping up and down, cackling maniacally. And then like the sane non-orcish part of me is like, no, dude. Like this is there are people being hurt by this. And it is not okay. But at the same time, there is one person who is being hurt by this who I'm totally okay with being hurt by it because you know what? Frankly, they deserve it. Uh, I don't normally think like that, but man, sometimes someone needs to be taught a lesson. I don't think they'll learn from it. Everybody else, though, they're oh yeah, tons of coders on the market. Everybody else is oh god, whatever. That's enough of that's enough of current current popular culture. So that'll date this real nice. And when people get back and be like, "Oh man, remember when Mammoth imploded?" Wait, Mammoth. What's the other one? Not Mammoth. The other one. Is it Mammoth? There's one of those other chat programmy things. I don't do the social media thing. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just don't. Um, I have an old Facebook account floating around somewhere. I wonder if I even have the login to it anymore. I have no idea. Um, no, it's not Mammoth. What is it? It's something like that, or Tusks or something. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Whatever. Anyway, um, I had some pithy rejoinder to that, but I completely lost it. So yeah, I've gone on and rambled for about as long as I read. So bye. Got me, Meta, and Amazon. Yeah. Yeah. These places aren't going anywhere. Anyway, see you all later. Thanks again for tuning in. Uh, next time. Until next time. Bye.